All right, so we're diving into Catcher in the Rye, that book everyone's always talking about. And I think we all kind of get why it's still a big deal, even after all these years, right? It's Holden Caulfield. He just gets under your skin.
He really does. And what's so clever, I think, is how Salinger throws us right into Holden's head. First-person narration, like you're hearing his thoughts, his voice, everything.
Yeah. And it's such a distinct voice, too, like that whole thing about phonies. Practically every other word with him, it's hilarious, but also kind of sad at the same time.
Right. Because that word phony, it tells us so much about what's eating. Holden up inside. It's not just that he hates fake people, though he does. It's like this way of rejecting the adult world.
Yeah.
All the rules and expectations that he just doesn't get.
That's such a good point. And doesn't he say somewhere, one of the biggest reasons I left Elkton Hills was because I was surrounded by phonies. That's all. They were coming in the goddamn window, something like that.
Exactly. It's like he's building a wall to protect himself. Holden was terrified of becoming a phony himself, so he pushes away anything that feels fake.
Makes sense, but then he pushes everyone away, too. But I guess that's part of why we still relate to him, right? Teenagers especially, they feel that so strongly. Now, the setting's important, too, right? I mean, Pensy Prep, his school, it's like a character itself.
Totally. Pensy Prep, it's like a petri dish of all the stuff Holden can't stand. It's like Salinger is saying, look, this is what happens when you force teenagers to fit in, to be something they're not.
Ugh, and that roommate, Stradlater, the poster boy for everything Holden hates, right?
Yeah.
And that whole thing with Jane Gallagher, just another example of how out of touch everyone else is.
Oh, totally. And Jane, she represents something really important to Holden, something real in a world that feels so artificial.
Yeah, and Stradlater's just clueless about that, isn't he? It makes you wonder, has anything really changed since Salinger wrote this? I mean, teenagers still feel that pressure to fit in, to be popular, to be cool.
It's true. The specifics might change, but those underlying anxieties, they're timeless. Wanting to belong, but also wanting to be yourself.
Yeah.
And Holden embodies that struggle perfectly.
He does. Okay, so eventually, Holden just bolts from Pensy, ends up in New York City, and you'd think he'd find some peace there, but he just keeps making things worse for himself.
Right. Classic Holden. But you can see how desperate he is for a real connection, someone who gets him. But he's also terrified of getting hurt, so he pushes people away before they can hurt him.
That date with Sally Hayes, what a disaster. He asks her to run away with him, which is kind of romantic in a messed up way, but then totally ruins it by being so negative.
Totally. It's like he doesn't know how to handle his own feelings.
Yeah.
He wants intimacy, but then pushes it away over and over. You see it with the women in the lavender room, too. He tries to connect, but it backfires.
And then there's that whole thing with Sunny, the prostitute. I mean, talk about looking for connection in all the wrong places.
Right, that Salinger's showing us just how lost and confused Holden is. He's experimenting, trying to figure out who he is, but it's all kind of sad and messy.
It really is. It's weird though, right? For a guy who hates everything fake, Holden finds comfort in some pretty strange places, like that whole museum thing.
The museum. Yeah, it's not just a place for Holden, is it? It's like this, I don't know, symbol of how much he wants things to just stay the same. Remember that line? Certain things should stay the way they are. You ought to be able to stick them in one of those big glass cases and just leave them alone.
He's talking about the animals and stuff, but you can totally tell he means his own life too, right? Like if he could just hit pause.
Exactly. The museum, it's safe. Nothing ever changes. And for Holden, that's really appealing. Just like his memories of Allie, his little brother. He holds on to those memories so tightly.
Speaking of Allie, that baseball glove Holden carries around, there's got to be more to that than meets the eye, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. That glove, it's like a physical representation of his grief, a part of Allie he can still hold on to. And when he writes that essay for Stradlater about the glove of all things, it just shows you how deeply Allie's death still affects him.
And Stradlater totally misses the point, right? He just wants something phony and surface level, like always.
It's like they're speaking two different languages. Stradlater can't see past the surface, but Holden, he's feeling everything so deeply. And he can't really put it into words, so he expresses it through these objects, these symbols.
Which brings us to that red hunting hat, right? Another one of those Holden Caulfield trademarks. What's the deal with that hat?
Oh, it's definitely a symbol. That hat is Holden's way of declaring his individuality. Like he's trying to stand out, be different, even if it means wearing a goofy hat. And the fact that he wears it backwards just adds to that whole I do what I want vibe.
Yeah, it's like a big red screw you to conformity. But then you see these moments where that tough exterior cracks, like when he's with Phoebe at the carousel.
Oh man, the carousel scene. It gets me every time. That carousel, it's all about childhood, innocence, going round and round, never really getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And you can tell Holden, he's drawn to that simplicity, but he's also old enough to know that you can't stay on the carousel forever.
Right, and he even says he wants to be the catcher in the rye, saving kids from falling off a cliff. Which, how heartbreaking is that? He just wants to protect everyone, especially Phoebe, from the pain of growing up.
Exactly. But deep down, I think he's realizing he can't protect her, or himself, really. Nobody can escape the falls, the disappointments, and facing that fact, that's a huge part of growing up.
Yeah, no escaping reality, right?
Yeah.
But even with all that heaviness, there are these moments of hope in the book, like when Holden talks to Mr. Antolini, his old teacher.
That's such an important conversation. Mr. Antolini, he sees Holden, the good and the bad. He even warns him about falling apart, tells him to watch out for that.
It's like he knows Holden's headed for a breakdown, right? But Holden, he's not really in a place to hear it.
No, not at all. He's got to hit rock bottom first.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the ending of the book is all about, that feeling of what now?
Because he finally goes home, but not because he wants to see his parents really. It's all about Phoebe.
Yeah, he even says, I had my door key with me and all, and I figured what I'd do, I'd sneak in the apartment, very quiet and all, and just sort of chew the fat with her for a while, like it's no big deal.
But it is a big deal because Phoebe's like this little beacon of light for him, and that scene in her room when he's just watching her sleep, man, that gets me every time.
It's pure,
Yeah.
And you can really see how much Holden wants to protect that innocence. He wants to be her catcher in the rye.
Yeah. But he's starting to realize he can't, right? Like, life's gonna happen whether they like it or not.
Exactly. That's the tragedy, in a way. It's not just that Holden's hurting, it's that he can't shield the people he loves from going through the same thing.
And that part where they talk about Allie, talk about a punch to the gut.
Right. All that grief and love just pouring out of Holden, it's raw. It reminds you that even when he's being a jerk, deep down, he feels things so intensely.
So where do we even go from there? What's the takeaway, you think, when it comes to Holden Caulfield in this whole book?
Honestly, I don't think there's one right answer, and that's what makes Catcher so great. It's not about easy answers, it's about asking the hard questions.
It makes you think, that's for sure. Long after you finish the book, you're still thinking about Holden, wondering if he ever figures things out. It's like, if you could talk to him, what would you say?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think everyone who reads it has their own answer. And that's the power of a book like this. It stays with you, makes you think, makes you feel.
Totally. And maybe that's why people are still reading it, still talking about it after all these years, because it captures something really real about what it means to be young, to be searching, to be a little messed up sometime.
Absolutely. Catcher in the Rye. It's a reminder that growing up is messy. It's full of contradictions and screw-ups, and moments of genuine beauty, too. And there's something about that honesty that just resonates with people,
It does. Well, on that note, I think we've done our deep dive on Holden Caulfield for today. Thanks for coming along for the ride.